Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Join the Patreon to get early access to videos and check out the website. Dr. Price, my good friend Tim Julie Mills, with his YouTube channel, Harmonic Atheist, he has a question. Suggestion of a question for a future visit, he said. Dr. Bob, we love you and are so appreciative of your work. Question number 1, have you ever played Santa Claus at Christmas time? Question number 2, in line with Neoplatonistic mindset, is it possible that the original Adam and Eve were meant to be seen as pure spirit beings until the fall? And that after they fell into sin, when God clothed them with skins, that God was not killing animals and giving Adam and Eve clothes, but the reference to covering them with skins means he was actually giving them physical bodies, i.e. human skin, for the first time. And that the human body was what covered the nakedness of their spirits that had now become wicked and fallen. Tim.
Well, on the one hand, I did play Santa in, what's the name of the darn thing? There's a video out there on YouTube where, oh man, it's something about this guy disproving Christmas, that everything you heard about it is bogus and all of that, and by the end of it, he says, well, come to think of it, why not have fun celebrating it anyway? Who cares? And I play me playing Santa, so I'm not actually Santa, but I'm me in a Santa costume, and I think they did a pretty good job of it. It was a lot of fun. If you've ever seen the picture on Facebook of me with these two black guys, one of whom had his teeny little daughter with him, and they asked if they could have a picture taken with me as Santa. They're sort of tough-looking guys, and so I was so tickled when they wanted to come over and ho, 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 and it was really great. They're looking at the little girl, and so you might see it again, in December. It might pop up again. But so I sort of played Santa. I've been mistaken for Santa a couple of times. Once I was at a Johnny Coleman seminary event, was not wearing a Santa outfit. I think I had my Easter Bunny suit on. No, I was just kidding. And this young kid who was obviously challenged, as they say. I can't be more specific. You could just tell he was sort of out of it. And he's a sweet, smart little guy, and he came up to me and sort of nestled up into my shoulder and said, I want an iPad for Christmas. And I suddenly thought, he thinks I'm Santa Claus. And it was such a thrill. And his mom came up and I said, you really need to get him that iPad. He's been a good boy this year. And I don't know if it worked or not, but when something like that happens, it is such a privilege, such an honor. You feel like you've been elevated to realize somebody's dream in their head. What a thrill. So yeah, I have in that
Before we
respect.
get to the flesh thing, because this is interesting you said that. I have a very good friend who's a magician. He's also a mentalist. So he knows how the mind works and things, and knows certain words and things that create avenues to manipulate, if you will. You can use it for good or bad. And he said he was at the hospital. I'll leave it unnamed until he tells me you can publicly say, well, let's just put it this way, his name's Mark, okay? Author of the gospel. No, I'm just kidding. And he said he was in a hospital, and there was a woman working there, and he approached her with the intentions of, trying this out, but also trying to help, people like you're talking about with Santa. You kind of deceived that little kid, in a sense, in a way. not in a negative way, but in a way they think you really have magic powers, that you're able to make sure they get their present. And he approached her. I don't know how the dialogue began, but in this thing he said, 3 days ago, I was asking God for... He's an atheist, by the way, but I was asking God, there's someone I can help, and they might need, help to help them. And wouldn't you know it, it was you. And she's like, what are you talking about? It got real strange, very spiritually strange. And because he asked her, let me ask you this, what's your favorite? Pick a card. Pick any card out of the 52 cards in the deck. And she picked one. And he's like, it is you. And so she's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, he opens his phone and there's a picture of him holding a card. Not just the card, but also the other thing she described. With the image of the actual thing she described and a card with the date, and here he is holding it and her name on it and everything, or something like that. It's so complex and she started crying immediately and was like, I have been struggling so hard. I have been suffering so much, and this was my answer. God answered my prayer. He sent you to really tell me He's still got me. He's still got my back, And he said, I didn't tell her that it was a trick. It changed her. It really did
by
something.
that point, you don't dare do that.
No. And she felt like it helped and changed her, which was really interesting. Because people too often use this stuff for bad. But he said, he walked away and said, I would never tell her that. But he said, he didn't tell me exactly how the trick goes, but I could tell you later off camera a little bit. And it's pretty interesting how he used this to make her feel so good. She started smiling after crying. Like, there's something looking out for me. I've been going through a tough time, and here's this feeling of comfort. But anyway, back to the bags of flesh. Were Adam and Eve just, at that moment, did God clothe them in flesh, or were they immortals with flesh in the garden? It's a really interesting question Tim asks, because we always think he sacrificed an animal, put the flesh of the animals on him, like skin clothings, if you will, like kind of like we used to think the fig...
Tarzan with the loincloth.
What are you thinking is going on? Is there comparative to another mythology that's borrowed here that gives any hint at what might be going on? Or?
Well, I don't think that's what the story is trying to tell us, but what some of the ancients, even later, mystics made of it strikes me as somehow very profound. Origen thought that what this is really telling us is that we, human beings, are the fallen angels, that we committed some sin in primordial times and were made captive to the prisons of flesh, like Socrates said, soma, sema, the body is a prison. And he seems to have believed in reincarnation, which would kind of fit it too. But that's, once I had a student after class come up and say, an older lady, I know this sounds crazy, but I have always just believed that we are the fallen angels. And I said, funny you should say that. You're just like Origen from the 3rd century who believed exactly that. But the even better is what the sages of the Kabbalah said, and Isaac Luria being the big one as far as I know. He said that, this tradition goes way back to Philo, at least, in the 1st century. And that God, his logos, the creative word, went forth and created the physical world, including humans. But there were stages of that creation. And at one point, the Logos assumes the form of a gigantic human body filling the universe. Gnostics thought this too, and some Hindus do. And then God decided to create a world of light, because this cosmic atom, what they call the atom Kadmon, he was made of pure spirit. And so, and light, like the Gnostic man of light, same stuff, really. And then, so he he does the same thing, creating a pure spirit prototype of the world. And he is about to it's sort of a shell, and he's about to fill it with divine light that is even purer and brighter. But it's so powerful that when it hits the shell of the world, it shatters it, and all the photons, to use modern expression, scatter through the universe. Oh boy. And so he assigned, now that wasn't the heavenly Adam's fault, but God assigns the atom Kadmon to go regather all the sparks, because these are the sparks of the Shekinah, the glory of God, that would have been the essence of the world, and are now scattered all over the place, in exile, even as Israel was. And so God assigns the cosmic atom to regather all the sparks. He does, but somehow he fumbles the ball at the end of the process, and they're all scattered again. And because of this failure, he is shrunk down to the proportions of a modern human and imprisoned in a body of flesh. And that was the Adam of the Garden of Eden. And so why is this even relevant? I mean, this is a cosmogony, an account of the beginning of the world. What about their soteriology? Because usually a thing about the Origen is setting up the method of salvation in a religion. And well, this is where the spiritual discipline of the Kabbalah comes in, which is called tikkun, which means purification. And there were various meditative exercises that were designed to attract the scattered photons of the Shekinah and regather them. A third attempt to do that. And when it works, finally, and it's up to Jews and this is an old idea, that if all Jews would observe one stinking Sabbath perfectly, that'd be enough to show Israel's worthiness, and the Messiah would come in the kingdom of God. Well, there's another version of that. If Jews will really get down to it and do these meditations and so on, enough of them for long enough, I don't know what the estimate was, they will have regathered the Shekinah, and the Messiah will come, and the kingdom of God will arrive. And they thought they were real close in the 17th century with Sabbatai Tzvi, and who was supposed to be the Messiah. And so it's all very much like the Gnosticism of Basilides, so amazingly like it that you got to wonder, did Luria reinvent the wheel, or did he have old Gnostic documents? Toss up, either is equally likely.
So since we talk about some later interpretations of some of these narratives, or even different stories, because that sounds like a different story even than what we read in Genesis, what is your best guess of what is actually being said in the Genesis narrative in the context of the authors who actually wrote these books? Is this animals being sacrificed and being clothed of humans wearing
Probably
animals?
so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. So later on, it's like anything else. There's always a new spin on everything.
Though that's a good one. I mean, that's a kind of reasonable guess. It's like, is this a signal that this is where they got these? I have to admit, so I'm not ruling that out, but there's so much more to it that, are you supposed to start connecting the dots that way? Could be, I don't know.
Yeah, because it makes me wonder, one of the things that might matter is dating of Genesis. If Genesis comes way later in a late Hellenistic era, you might find some stuff that might potentially, because if it's old, the older you go, the more likely it's not going to connect to possibly some of these, what we call later ideas. What if these later ideas, like Enoch, start to kind of creep their way in around the time that Genesis is developed and coming on the scene, and that these aren't necessarily as old as people want to suppose. Yes, they're using Mesopotamian sources. If you go with Russell Gmirkin and others like Lemke and others, they'll say, hey, this is Hellenistic book, you could easily get Berosus and Manetho to use some of the histories. However, we're going to give our own Hellenistic spin, where we have sons of God and such. All this stuff starts playing a role in these narratives. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting way you phrased it, because could they be immortal and have flesh?
Well, that's where in the Eden story the tree of life comes in. It seems to be stated in a more anthropomorphic, crude sense that since this was God's garden and refuge, like the king's paradise garden, it must have been the fruit of that, and all the trees must have been for the Creator and his fellow gods, because it refers to, oh, behold, they have become like one of us. That ain't the editorial we. So that it must, this is how the gods maintained immortality. Later on, centuries later, Ignatius speaks of the Eucharist as the medicine of immortality. Well, that's kind of what the tree of life was, like the ambrosia and nectar of the Greek gods. But it was all right for the Adam to eat of it, because why replace him? Well, when he wears out, just keep him going. We're always going to need him. We're always going to have this garden. And then Eve is an afterthought, because Adam was getting bored. It wasn't there wasn't enough work to keep him busy, and he then says, well, let's find a fit companion with the animals. Maybe we could come up with some quadrupeds that would be good friends of his. Didn't work. Let's take a piece of them, let's clone him, and so forth. And then there's this unintended consequence. They find that they can mate once the serpent tells them that's possible. What the heck? And then Yahweh Elohim comes to realize this in a sort of Sherlockian manner. Hey, where is everybody? Over here in the bushes. We hid here because we were naked. Oh, you were... who told you this? Told you were naked? The serpent. And so, well, but she made me do it. So, and he didn't want him to gain immortality and the ability to procreate, because then you'd have a whole race of immortals, more and more all the time. And look, we got enough deities around this place. And so he says, okay, I can't change it now, but you're not getting any more of that fruit of the tree of life. And when you have kids, lady, you're going to wish you didn't, because of all the pain involved. And you might think, well, I can forestall that by locking my husband out of the bedroom like Scarlett O'Hara tried, but you're not going to be able to stick with that. Your desire will be for your husband, and because of the family structure of the result, you will be enslaved to him. Alice, why don't you, what do you think of that? You asked for it, lady. And it's a legitimation story, legitimating the domestic social order by saying, now you might want to become a feminist or something, but you better not, because this is the way God ordained it. I always used to ask my students in class, who do you think first wrote this, a man or a woman? And it's pretty obvious that it must have been some guy like Ralph Cramden. And so I think that's what it was about, and it has such links with about the age of these things. This so closely parallels the story of the creation of Enkidu in the Gilgamesh epic, which is thousands of years older, that you can't just say the first time Enoch or Adam appears in the Bible or its sources that it was a recent invention.
Right.
That the texts were, but Manetho was Berosus. They were using very old stuff.
Right.
So one thing about Russell Gmirkin, he isn't saying all this stuff was cooked up by a committee of writers in the 3rd century. It was put together in a great amalgam from traditions and texts that everybody brought to the table.
And most of this was oral tradition. Prior was his.
Yeah, there must have been plenty of that.
Yeah, and then anything written would have been from other cultures until they constitutionalized their own. So interesting.
That's a great example of a paradigm shift. His theory doesn't force you to just dump the documentary hypothesis or the oral tradition studies of Gunkel and Mowinkle and others. It finds a place for them. It just changes, it fixes the only remaining paradox in the old theories. It just shifts the focus so you go, oh, I see how those things came together. It was a different way than we thought, but basically it was the same thing. Beautiful example of that.